How did entire families stay warm through a winter that could kill a grown man in minutes with no fireplace, no electricity, and no insulation of any kind? Picture the Great Plains in the heart of January, snow to the horizon in every direction, Arctic wind pouring south, with no mountain and no forest anywhere to slow it down, and air so cold that every breath feels like swallowing glass. To almost anyone looking at that landscape, it reads as a place where human life simply should not be possible. Now step through a doorway, because inside, a child is sleeping, and that child is not wearing a coat. A grandmother is stirring a stew over a low hearth. Someone near the fire is pulling off an outer layer because the room has gotten too warm. Outside, it is 30 below. Inside, it's closer to 60 degrees. And the only thing standing between those two worlds is a wall made of dirt. Now, this was not luck. Winters back then were not somehow gentler than ours, and it was not some lost technology that vanished with the people who built it. Their secret was never hidden in better tools or better fuel. It was hidden beneath their feet. But before I show you how it worked, I have to warn you about 3 things you are going to see, because each one is going to sound impossible. First, the roof of that house was so heavy it should not have been standing at all, and the Mandan did something with it that no architect today would ever sign off on. Second, there's a question almost nobody thinks to ask about these homes. Who actually owned them? The answer is going to reshuffle everything you assume about this world. And third, these houses never failed. Not once. But there was a winter when they stood exactly as designed, warm, solid, perfect, and completely empty. So let me show you the machine. And then, let me show you what happened to the people who built it. Here's the thing about the ground you have been standing on your whole life. You assume that in winter it is the coldest thing out there, frozen, hostile, dead. It isn't. The frost only goes down so far. Below that line, the earth is quietly holding on to heat, and it has been holding it for you the entire time. Go down just a few feet, and the soil sits at somewhere around 50 degrees, year-round, no matter what the air above it is doing. -30 at the surface, 50 degrees, 4 feet down. Today we have language for that. We call it thermal mass and geothermal stability, and it fills entire engineering textbooks. But the people who figured it out first had no thermometer and no textbook. What they had was patience. They noticed that roots stayed alive underground that was frozen solid on top. They noticed that when the cold came, the animals didn't run, they went down. Nature had been showing everyone the blueprint for thousands of years. These were simply the people who bothered to look. So instead of trying to outbuild the winter, they went into the ground with it. They dug the floor of the house down below the frost line, and then they packed the whole structure over with soil, prairie, sod, and living grass, until the home was wrapped in an enormous thermal blanket. And then came the fire, and this is the part most people misunderstand. That hearth was not there to heat the air. Air is worthless. Air leaves. That fire was charging the walls. Hour after hour, the heat soaked into the earthen floor and the packed soil around it, and the ground took it in slowly and stored it, like an enormous natural battery. Then, all night long, it gave it back a little at a time as the temperature outside dropped further and further. The fire dies down at midnight. The house is still warm at sunrise, because the walls are still paying back what they borrowed. And these were not small buildings. A family lodge could run 40 to 60 feet across. The roof carried well over a foot of packed earth on top of it, which means the structure overhead was holding up tens of tons of soil every single day, without a single nail. It was big enough for several families, their food stores, and, when a blizzard came in, their horses. You heard me right. When the storm hit, they brought the horses inside the house. But the earth is a double-edged tool. And this is what almost nobody tells you. Earth is heavy, and earth drinks water. A roof that could shrug off a whole winter of snow could come down in the spring because saturated soil can weigh nearly twice what dry soil weighs. This was never a house you built once and forgot about. This was a house you had to feed. So how do you feed a house made of dirt? You start the way the Mandan, the Hidatsa, and the Arikara started along the Missouri River, with a circle drawn on the ground. Then came the cottonwood. Massive posts, chosen for strength, set deep into the earth to form the central frame that would carry everything else. Heavy crossbeams were laid between them, then smaller poles fanned out from the center, then a lattice of woven willow branches. then thick layers of prairie grass, and finally the earth itself, packed soil and cut sod, laid over the whole dome until the house disappeared into the landscape it was made of. At the center, directly beneath a small opening in the roof, burned the hearth. And the way that fire got its air is the quietest piece of genius in the entire building. The entrance was a long tunnel, and that tunnel sat lower than the living floor. Cold air is heavy, so it did exactly what heavy things do. It slid down the passage and crawled along the bottom, straight to the fire, which swallowed it. It never spread across the room. It never reached the sleeping platforms. And the warm air and smoke rose up and out through the roof hole, pulling more fresh air in behind it. No chimney, no fan, no moving parts. Every timber was holding up the roof. Every layer of earth was storing heat. Every opening was steering the air. Now I told you the Mandan did something with that roof that no architect today would ever sign off on. Here it is. They lived on top of it. In the warm months, the roof of an earth lodge was the village's rooftop terrace. People sat up there in the evening. Corn was spread out to dry up there. Children played up there. Elders climbed up and sat for hours watching the river. And we are not guessing about this. 19th century paintings and sketches of Mandan villages show dozens of people standing on a single roof at the same time, talking, working, watching the horizon. Sit with that for a second. The only things holding that structure up are timber, woven willow, and packed dirt. And you can invite the entire village to stand on the roof. What travelers riding across the prairie dismissed as a grassy hill was in fact a load-bearing roof carrying a crowd. Nothing about that house was accidental. Not one beam, not 1 inch of soil, not one opening. Every part of it was doing a job. Which brings me to the question I left hanging, the one almost nobody thinks to ask. Somebody drew that circle on the ground. Somebody walked the riverbank and decided which cottonwood was strong enough to carry tons of soil for the next 30 years. Somebody knew exactly how thick each layer of sod had to be, and somebody climbed up after every hard winter and patched the roof without weakening the structure underneath. So who was that? Among the Mandan, the Hidatsa, and the Arikara, the answer is the same every time. Women. Women built these houses, women maintained them, and women owned them. These were matrilineal societies, and that word is doing a lot of work, so let me spell out what it actually meant on the ground. The lodge passed from mother to daughter. When a man married, he did not bring his wife home, he moved into hers. And if the marriage ended, he walked out, and the house stayed exactly where it was, with her. Inside a single lodge, you would often find a grandmother, her daughters, their husbands, and the grandchildren, a line of women running 3 generations deep, under one roof of packed earth. So this was never just a machine for holding heat. It was a bloodline with a roof over it. And under that roof, the fire in the center did far more than cook. It was where visitors were received, where ceremonies were held, where the family ate and argued and decided things. In the long dark of winter, grandparents told the stories of ancestors, while the smoke curled up toward the roof hole, and the children listened. Boys learned to shape arrows and work a hide by watching men who had done it 10,000 times. Girls learned to weave, to preserve food, to keep the fire, and to read a roof to know, by looking, where the soil had thinned and where the water would get in. Knowledge in that house was never taught, it was lived, and an earth lodge could stand for decades but only because someone kept feeding it. Rotten timbers were pulled and replaced, fresh sod was laid over thin spots. Soil was tamped back down after every spring rain, which leads to the one sentence I need you to carry with you into the final part of this story, because everything turns on it. An earth lodge does not die in a storm. It dies when there is no one left to climb up on the roof and repair it. And here is what tells you this was real engineering and not a lucky accident. It happened more than once, in places that had never heard of each other. Along the Columbia Plateau, the interior Salish and the Sahaptin peoples dug their winter homes deep into the ground beside the rivers and let the earth hold the cold out. 1,500 miles south, in the desert, the ancestral Puebloans and the Mogollon built with stone and adobe walls thick enough to drink in the punishing daytime heat and then hand it back after dark, when the desert night turns cold enough to kill. Different materials, different languages, different centuries. The physics never changed, and every one of these peoples arrived at the same conclusion. Sometimes the safest place to put a roof is not on top of the land, it's inside it. So let me finish the promise I made you at the beginning. These houses never failed. Not one of them ever lost to a winter. But in the summer of 1837, a steamboat came up the Missouri River carrying smallpox. And the Mandan, the architects of everything I have just shown you, were nearly erased in a matter of months. From thousands of people down to something on the order of 150. And the lodges were still standing, the roofs still held, the walls were still warm. Deep in the floor, the earth was still releasing the heat it had borrowed from the summer before, exactly as designed, exactly on schedule. The machine was running perfectly. There was just almost no one left inside for it to keep warm. No one climbing up to patch the roof, no one tamping the soil back down after the rains. And an earth lodge with nobody to feed it doesn't collapse dramatically. It just softens and sinks, and after a few seasons, it goes back to being a mound of dirt. That is why, if you drive across North Dakota today, what you see out in the grass are shallow rings, faint circular depressions in the prairie. Those are not ruins, those are footprints. The footprints of houses and of the grandmothers who built them. Today, archaeologists and engineers have confirmed every principle those women were working with. Thermal mass, earth-sheltered construction, passive airflow. And now that energy costs are climbing, architects are selling those same ideas back to us as cutting-edge design. We call it innovation. It might be more honest to call it remembering. So how did those families survive a winter that could kill a person in minutes? It was never a bigger fire. It was never luck. It was never some miracle we lost. It was knowledge, observed, tested, corrected, and handed down, generation after generation, until it became a house. They did not conquer winter, they learned how to live with it. And maybe that's why the houses outlasted the people who made them. You cannot conquer anything forever, but you can live alongside it for as long as there is someone left to keep the fire. If this changed the way you see those quiet circles out in the grass, tell me in the comments which part stayed with you, the roof that could hold an entire village, the women who owned the land beneath it, or the winter of 1837. And tell me which forgotten machine you want next. The Viking longhouse, heated by earth, cattle, and one long fire. The Athabascan winter house, built to beat 40 below. Or the Inuit snow shelter, the only home on Earth made out of the very thing trying to kill you. Subscribe, and let's keep uncovering the knowledge history very nearly left behind.